morning, hello, it's 9 o'clock, it's Monday. I'm Victoria Derbyshire. Welcome to our programme. After a wait of almost 3 decades, an inquiry begins today into the contaminated blood scandal of the 70s and 80s, which has led to the deaths of nearly 3,000 people. We bring together 6 people whose lives have been devastated by the scandal to ask them how they feel on the day the inquiry they've fought for years finally begins. A public inquiry finally starts today into one of the biggest medical disasters in this country's history. In the 1970s and 80s, thousands of NHS patients were infected by contaminated blood products. Many, including newborn babies and children, were later diagnosed with hepatitis C and HIV. Almost 3,000 people are known to have died, possibly many more.
The contaminated blood scandal of the 70s and 80s is often called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. Broadly, 2 groups were affected. First, people with the blood disorder haemophilia. Almost 5,000 were given a treatment contaminated with hepatitis and in many cases HIV. Of those, around half lost their lives. The problem was a new medication made from the pooled blood plasma of thousands of donors. Just one infection and the whole batch was contaminated. Britain, though, couldn't make enough, so bought from the United States, where prisoners and drug addicts were paid to give blood. There were warnings as early as 1983, but the products were still used on adults and children. More than 80 boys were infected at just one specialist school in Hampshire.
Because we knew that a batch of treatment was infected, a large number of haemophiliacs at the school were all infected at the same time. In my school year, for example, I think I'm the only one left now. And as I say, many in the years above and below me, also many of those have lost their lives.
Then there is the second group, those who received a blood transfusion after childbirth or an operation. Exactly how many were infected with hepatitis C, we just don't know for sure. Estimates range from 5,000 right up to 28,000. A public inquiry opens in Westminster this week. It comes after years of campaigning from victims and their families. The key questions: did drug companies and health officials know about the risks? Did ministers respond quickly enough? And when it became clear that something had gone very wrong, was there an attempt to cover it up? The inquiry is being led by a judge, Sir Brian Langstaff. It's expected to take between 2 and 4 years to reach its findings.
Well, let's talk now to some people who've been personally affected by the blood contamination scandal. Steve Dymomd is here. Steve is a haemophiliac infected with hepatitis C in the 1980s. And he's here with his wife, Sue Gorman. Also with us, Andy Evans, who is a haemophiliac. He's been on our programme a number of times. He was infected with HIV as a child. Barry Fitzgerald's wife, Jane, was infected with hepatitis C through a blood transfusion, and she died in 2015. Jan Smith's son, Colin, was a haemophiliac, and he died of AIDS, aged 7, in 1990. Laura Smith is Jan's daughter-in-law, and she is here to support Jan. Thank you, all of you, for coming on the programme. I want to ask you all, because it is such a huge day, 3 decades you have waited for this inquiry, and today it finally begins. How are you feeling, Steve?
I'm just wondering whether they're going to have the courage and the bravery to search fully into all the responsibilities, whoever it involves, whether it be government ministers, drug companies, etc., etc. But it's also a moment when today we will have a commemoration for the 3,000 dead haemophiliacs.
Andy, how are you feeling today?
It's all a bit surreal, to be honest, Victoria. It's a day that I never thought would come. As hard as I've fought and as long as I've campaigned, it's been this is a day that I really never thought would happen. And I think over the next 3 days, it's probably going to hit home when I meet up with everybody. All of the victims come to the commemoration. We see what's happened with that, and there's going to be a lot of joy. There's going to be a lot of angst, and we're all going to have to support each other, because this is 30 years down the line, and for some people who have been there for all this time, it's as I say, it is a surreal moment.
Jan, what would you say?
I'm quite nervous about today, funny enough, because, you know, we all support each other, but through the internet. To actually sit and meet these people, I think it's going to be very emotional today.
This is the first time you have met everybody else here.
Yeah, but I'm always in contact with them,
Yes.
and, you know, and to see other people, and they support you so well with Tainted Blood, and it's just going to be wonderful but emotional to see people finally face to face. But we're hoping for, you know, the outcome to be hopefully what it should be.
The
You know,
truth.
the truth.
But it's a bittersweet sort of moment in the fact that A, it's taken so long to get here, but secondly, the inquiry was conceded in such bad faith. The Prime Minister had refused several times to actually grant an inquiry, and she outmanoeuvred herself, and so ended up by giving an inquiry. And that somehow also has an impact on people, that they didn't say, OK, something went terribly wrong, we need to look at it. It's never happened like that.
Yes. Barry, how are you feeling today?
Well, I agree with Andy. It is surreal, but it just hammers home to me the fact that I'm only here because my Jane isn't. And that hurts, because we've been together a long, long time. In fact, next year would herald 40 years together. So it does hammer home more to me, I imagine, than a lot of the others. Not apart from, obviously, young Colin, who was never going to reach those heights, unfortunately. But I'm angry. I'm very angry, because from the very beginning with Jane, obviously, we had no idea. But from the very beginning, she was almost infected straight away, right at the beginning of our relationship.
Well, tell our audience why Jane had a blood transfusion.
She had a blood transfusion.
Because she wasn't a haemophiliac.
She was not a haemophiliac, no. But I must stress we are all in the same boat together.
Oh, yes,
I don't like that differentiation. But, yes, she suffered an ectopic pregnancy. And I'm sure most people know what that is. And she became anemic as a result of the operation to alleviate that medical problem. And it was just 1 unit of blood. And that was right back at the end of the 70s. But we weren't to know for 25 more years, 2004, that she'd been infected.
Wow.
25 years, and that's a long time living in ignorance. Sometimes ignorance is good, and sometimes it's bad.
How did she die in 2015?
Well, according to the hospital, she died of pneumonia, but we all know that was a suppression as far as I'm concerned, because I did have to fight for a death certificate to have the right verdict put on there, and eventually I did succeed, that she died as the primary result of having been the administration of a contaminated blood product.
Okay. Sue, how are you feeling?
I think it's all very scary, because it really is a voyage into the unknown. I mean, even those of us who have got into the campaign, people like Andy who deal with the politics, the politicians, the people who research the science, the medical issues, none of us know what a public inquiry is, because we've never been part of one before. And in one way it represents a loss of control. Until now, because nobody's been doing anything for us apart from the press, we've had to do everything for ourselves. And all of a sudden, some of that is being taken away from us. There are the lawyers involved, obviously, who have their own expertise, the people who've set up the inquiry, Sir Brian when he starts hearing us. And I think for most of us, fundamentally, it's a very scary step into the unknown.
A leap of faith, in a way.
Well, it's a leap, but it's, after 30 years, it's difficult to have so much faith.
Understood.
But also, I think it's going to, obviously there's a certain knowledge base of certain things that happened and who did what up to a point. But if this covers even more the other part of the iceberg, I think people will be really, really hurt at how badly they've been betrayed and lied to.
The problem as well, sorry Victoria
That's all
for
right.
interrupting, is that we are sort of 3 to 4 decades down the line, and the people that were around and responsible for these decisions 30 to 40 years ago, some of them won't be here anymore. And as we know, some of the documents and you know, the bits and pieces of evidence that we've gathered are very few in comparison to what there should be out there, and we know that a lot of those have already been destroyed. So how deeply the inquiry can get into the truth of this remains to be seen, and I think that's probably a cause for scepticism amongst our community in so far as how much of the truth can be discovered.
Yeah.
And added to that is that it's already clear that a number of the people who are ageing, shall we say, are saying they don't remember. And there's that card to be sort of dealt with as well.
Can you tell our audience about your little boy Colin?
I could write a book about what he'd done. He was, you know, he was such a... I mean, I had 4 other boys. Colin was the youngest. 3 other boys. Colin was the youngest. And, but he was funny, humorous. He loved Lego. That's the only thing. You touch his Lego, didn't like it. Because if he made a model and it got broke, he would hit the wall. He didn't like it. But he was such a lovely boy. He never knew how ill he was, because he never brought it up. We would have been honest with him, I think, but it was never discussed, so why bring something up? But I think in a way that he must have known as well, because a couple of times he'd have a fight with his brother or something like that, or he'd say to Daniel, Laura's husband, you can have my toys when I'm gone.
Really?
Yeah. And towards the end, because he was an amazing drawer, towards the end all he kept drawing was gravestones, headstones and crosses, and so I think he never asked us, but I think he realised.
I know you have a tattoo which you're okay with showing us. This is the last drawing that Colin did before he died.
Yeah.
And he died at age 7.
Yeah.
And that's his writing as well,
It
isn't
is, yeah. When he died, they sent his books home from school, and this was on the cover of one of his books.
And Laura, the ripple effect through families of this scandal, how would you describe that?
Oh, there's just too many emotions to describe it, really. I see the effect it has on my mother and father-in-law, but I also see what it has on my husband, totally different effect. He's gone through life up and down, really. He's had depression, and which has all stemmed back to his little brother. So
And in the 80s, which is when Colin was infected, it was a time when there was real stigma about AIDS,
Yes, it was.
which is what Colin died of.
Yes.
Because he was given contaminated blood, because he was a severe haemophiliac. What was that like?
It was a very hard time for us. We had like AIDS dead writ on the house.
You had what, sorry, darling?
AIDS dead writ on the house, big letters.
Graffiti?
Oh yeah. Cross scratching in the door. People would cross the road if we walked. We were known as the AIDS family.
Wow.
Not the Smith family, the AIDS family. And in the end we couldn't take much more, so we moved.
And Andy, you, as I said in the introduction, you were infected with HIV as a child.
Yeah.
You nearly died. You've told our audience about that before. Did you feel the stigma around HIV/AIDS too?
I think in some ways it was almost a benefit that I was so young, because my parents protected me from a lot of that. And I feel that my mum, who's my only parent still alive, probably is still protecting me a little bit from what went on back in the day. Because I think if she told me the truth, then I would probably cave in and stop campaigning altogether. So really, I mean, I was unaware of all of this until I was told by my parents when I was 13 years old. And that was at the point when I was getting ill. And so, again, moving from a normal teenager into hospital, again, there's that shielding of the stigma there. We were put in with cancer patients, with leukemia patients in the children's hospital, and so you'd make friends and they'd pass away, and this was all, you know, after growing up and going to clinic appointments for my haemophilia at the children's hospital. Slowly the patients there would stop coming in as well, and you'd wonder why, and you'd hear the news. And that's something that I think that really shapes you, is, you know, you lose people even when you don't know what's happening, losing those people along the way and then suddenly finding out why it's been all along. It's really hard to take.
Yeah.
But, you know, as Laura was saying, it really does affect people differently. I mean, my sister, who's 4 years younger than me, had to bring herself up during the time that I was ill. And that's really impacted the rest of her life. She's very independent now, fiercely so. And, you know, but also we get to meet at conferences and places like this, and the inquiries and the protests, people that we'd never meet before. And I actually met my wife at a bereavement event for one of these, because she lost her brother. She was 16 and he was 24.
Right.
So that's one good thing that's come out of this, but yeah, horrific.
Steve, you've had a really hard summer, haven't you?
Yes.
You've been really ill, connected to the hepatitis C you were exposed to. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, one of the things that a consequence of having hepatitis C for so long obviously destroys the liver, deforms the liver, and so the blood doesn't flow around the body properly, and it creates what they call varices in the stomach wall, and they burst. And as a hemophiliac, you're in serious trouble, and that's happened 6 times in the last 2 years. And the other problem is not living near a specialist hospital. There's also an added fear that the medical staff who are treating you aren't sufficiently expert to be able to cope entirely with the whole condition. And one of life's little ironies is that the drugs that cleared my hepatitis C in 2015 have caused massive hearing loss. So it's almost, as Andy was saying, you just never enjoy good health throughout your life. And one of the things that made life very hard for us was that hepatitis C wasn't really identified clearly with symptoms until the early 90s. And so all the symptoms I had were treated for other things.
Yes, they didn't know, they didn't realise, yeah. Okay, thank you all of you very much for coming on the programme, and we will of course continue to talk to you throughout this inquiry, and let's hope it brings you what you need, which is the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you very much. That would be a first. Well, we'll see. Thank you.